Hi, this is PR Frank, and today we're going to talk about basic structural elements. They're called semantic elements in HTML5, and what they do is they help us organize the document into something that web browsers can use, and it makes it really easy for other people reading your code to understand what part is what part. And I think probably the best thing to do here, because here's what we've been working with here. We've just got a bunch of random information. So I think the best thing to do here is we'll start from scratch and we'll build a page with the information we know using semantic elements. So here we go. Now, I don't have to retype much of this stuff. What I can do is I can select everything in the head, right? Including my declaration and my opening HTML tag, and I'll just copy that. I'm going to go to File, New, and paste. Okay, now no colors, and that's because I haven't saved it as an HTML document yet. Now when I save it this time, I want to put it into a different folder, because eventually what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a 3-page website through the course of these tutorials. So I want to put it in another folder. So I'm going to go to File, Save As. So I think inside of my tutorial folder, I would like to make 3-page site. So notice how I put the hyphens in between each word. And it's a really good practice not to use spaces in folder names or file names when you're doing HTML. Okay, so this has been my 3-page site. And the first page of a site is just called index.html. All right, now I can use a style sheet for this if I wish. So I think I'll just go ahead and keep that external style sheet link there, and I'll make another file called styles.css for myself. I don't need these internal styles. Okay. My content is probably going to stay the same. This is HTML tutorials, HTML, CSS, Dreamweaver, my name, UTF-8, and the device width, that all stays the same. So now I'm ready for my body tag. Give myself some space, and I can't forget my closing HTML tag. It automatically does that for me. So the magic of these semantic tags happens inside the body element. Usually it starts with a header. This is different than a heading, which we covered in another lesson. So I'll type in header. Inside the header is usually the stuff that's going to appear at the top. It can be an image, it can be some text, but usually it's something large to get the attention of the people coming to your site. So why don't we tab in here and use an H1, and inside the H1 I'm just going to write the word header for now. That's going to clue us into the fact that this is our header when we look at it on our page. Okay. The next thing after the header is usually the navigation, and that's a simple semantic element just called nav. Okay. And inside the navigation, eventually we're going to have 3 pages. So let me type this, home, and I'm using a shift and then the backslash, which is right above on my keyboard, right above the return or right next to the curly braces. Just this guy, it's called a vertical pipe. I'm going to have home, work, and about. These eventually will be links to other pages, but that's for a later tutorial. But that's just my navigation. My next section is my main. Okay. Now this main is a structural or a semantic element that can be used to indicate the main area of your page. Okay, so imagine if you have a header at the top of your page and the navigation under that, you have a whole section of other stuff that's in the main section. And right inside of that, I'm going to put some other elements. Imagine we have a sidebar. Well, the code for that is aside. So we put the aside element in there. And in the aside, for now, we're just going to type the word aside, and let's make it an H2 element. Okay, so when we view this, it'll show as the word aside in there. Okay, another section is, maybe we'll just call it section. This is another structural element that we can use to determine a section. So this section will contain the section that goes next to the aside or the sidebar, and inside of that we can have an article. Okay, and an article is maybe something that somebody goes to a website to read. So a few paragraphs in there. So let's go ahead and put a few paragraphs in our article. Okay. In order to really make them paragraphs, though, we have to make sure we put an opening p tag and a closing p tag at the beginning and end of each one. Okay. But one nice thing we can do so we can get this all aligned well is we can select all of that and just press our tab key, and that whole section just pops on over there. So now we can tell that these paragraphs are definitely within the article section of this area of this section, actually. And I think it would be nice to also have some paragraphs inside of the aside. But let's just take one of these paragraphs. Copy that. And underneath the H2, we've got another paragraph of text for whatever content might be inside of our aside. So we've got an aside, a section with an article in it, our main ends, and then right before our body ends, we would like to put the thing that goes at the bottom, which is just the footer. Okay, and inside the footer, we'll put some text. Usually that's information about the author. Okay, so I can say PR Frank, and the copyright symbol, which we learned before, is the ampersand copy. There it is, and 2020. So that'll just some filler text for our footer, giving us some information down there. So now we've got all of our semantic elements. Let's see what this page looks like. I'm going to save it. I'm going to go to the preview, and you can see it doesn't really look like much. We got a header, the navigation, the aside. These next three paragraphs are that section with the article in it, and then we have our footer. So it doesn't really look like much. It kind of all runs together. We have to use the power of styles to begin styling this so that it really looks like a website. So here we go. Like I said before, we kept this link element that links to something called styles.css. And what we need to do is create that. So I'm going to go to File, New, File, Save As, navigate to my 3-page site, and right here next to our index file, we're going to put our CSS. Now, I think we're getting to an advanced stage where I can show you a subfolder, and I'll do that. I like to make sure that my CSS is inside of a folder called CSS. Okay? So you'll notice that I call it styles.css, and it's inside of another folder called CSS, which is right next to my index inside of my 3-page site. Okay, I'll save that. So now we got to go back over to our index and modify this a little bit. It's not going to be able to find styles.css because it's in another folder. So the way we tell an HTML document or a browser that's looking at an HTML document where a folder is we just type the name of the folder and then slash. And as you can see, it shows up with that exact link. So this means, hey, go look inside of a folder called CSS, and inside of that folder, you'll see styles.css, right? So this is really important for your future work to make sure you understand that you are looking into another folder for your styles. Let's go ahead and start making our styles. And let's look at the header first. So we go to our style sheet, and because header is an HTML element, we just type the word header, okay? And that's our selector. And we put our curly braces in, and now we're going to start putting our properties in there. Let's first just style these things with a width and a background color so we can tell them apart, okay? So width, and let's make the width of this header, let's make it 800 pixels. And let's make the background color, here it is. Let's make the background color of that. Let's go with some greens, okay? I'll just make it a dark green. And now we'll style our navigation, okay? So we just type nav, that's the name of the element, so we just type it in there. We put our curly braces. Let's give it a width of the same. We want it to be 800 pixels. We also want to have a background color. Okay, let's make it a slightly different green down here in this section of greens. Okay, we can just maybe make it, how about this dark gray? That might look nice. Okay, the next element we had was actually we had a main. So we're going to put in main, and we're going to give that also a width of 800. All these things have widths of 800. and a background color that, let's make it match our header. Okay, so that dark green we had. Inside of our main, we had an aside. So we just type the word aside. And this time we're going to give it a width that's a lot less than 800 because we want our width to be a lot more narrow than that. So let's call that 200 pixels. It's 1/4 of 800. And let's give it a background color of something lighter. Let's see. I think corn silk might go well with that color scheme we've got going on. Next to our side, we had a section. Okay, give that a width of the rest of those pixels, which is going to be 600 pixels. 200 plus 600 is 800 pixels. And hopefully they'll sit next to each other later. And a background color. Let's go with floral white. And finally, now you might notice I skipped over the article. For now, it's not necessary to make the article a different color than the section that it's inside of. So we'll leave that alone for now. And we'll also color our footer. Now our footer, I want it to actually be the exact same thing as our header. So I can do something easy. I can just copy and paste the styles from the header to the footer. Looks good to have the same thing at the top and the bottom. So now that I have all these widths and these colors, I can save my page and I can switch over to my index and preview it. So now you can see what I have. I've got a header, nav, aside. This whole main is the same as the header, and inside of it, it's got the aside and the article, which is inside the section, and then finally my footer. Now, this still looks terrible, but as you can see, it's starting to kind of color the different sections. You can see how I can start to control what my web page looks like. So, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the section to sit right next to the aside. It's going to make it look a whole lot more like a web page. So, what I need to do is float some elements. So, the very first thing I should probably float is my aside. And the property is just float left. I also have to add that float left property to my section and my footer. That way they're all going to flow next to each other. So you can see what's starting to happen here. I've got my header, I've got my navigation, my aside, my section, and then my footer. So they're all nicely floating in, and it's beginning to look like a web page. So as I'm starting to design this thing, I can see some issues. I can start to fix some things. One of the things I want to fix right away is the look of the header and the footer. It's really hard to read that black text on a green background. Well, it's no problem because with styles, I just go into my style sheet, and remember the property for changing the color of the text is just color. And why don't I make it that nice floral white that we used before? And as you can see, that shows up a whole lot better. So let's also put that in our footer. So the color of the text looks good. And I think it would be good if our header and our footer were just a little thicker, a little taller. So for my header, I'm also going to give it a height. Okay, I'm going to give it a height of maybe 100 or 250 pixels. So header's nice and big, giving us lots of room to put something there. And the height of my footer, I'll just make it a whole lot smaller, like 50 pixels. So now I have something that's beginning to resemble a website. Now there's a whole lot more to do with this, but I hope that gives you an idea of how these semantic elements, when you use them with your HTML, they can really begin to help give some structure to your site. Now, what happens when a search engine searches an HTML document is it looks in the header for important information. It looks at the navigation to understand what pages you have. If it's searching for an article, it's going to be able to use the article tag. If it's looking for information about you, about the author, about how to contact the organization, it's going to look in the footer. So these are also important for what we call search engine optimization. So I hope that was helpful to you. In the next lesson, we'll talk about how to make this style sheet in combination with the semantic elements a much more powerful tool in laying out your website to look like a website.